Hi, everybody. Welcome back for more short stories. This is the fourth time I've tried doing this today. We'll see if I can do it this time without the phone ringing or some other craziness happening around here. This is part two of My Father's Shade. Carl is a shy boy. He tucks his chin into his chest, but with a little coaxing he unfolds. He's tall for his age, with long bangs that he tucks behind his ears. He has an incredible aptitude for small projects, anything that requires fine motor skills, model aircraft in particular. When I picked him up for our weekend, he came prepared with his tools: clamps, clips, tweezers, half-finished tubes of glue, cotton swabs, magnifying glasses, and delicate paintbrushes. He keeps these accoutrements neat and orderly in a small hobbyist box that belonged to my father. In the car, he held the box in his lap, palms pressed flat against the top, his most prized possession. On the way home, I stopped at the Quick Craft, a little shop that's been in business since I was a kid. My father always wanted me to build model planes, but my attempts were subpar at best, something that visibly disappointed him. He'd complete his Corsairs and Hellcats before I could snap together the main sections of the fuselage. He'd look at my jumbled plastic pieces and sigh, a long, low keening. Eventually, he let me buy toy soldiers to set up around his planes. I still have his collection. They survived somehow when most of my other possessions were discarded or abandoned in a string of lost weekends. They're kept on display in a bookcase, and Carl often stands in front of the shelves admiringly. I've recently begun adding Carl's creations on a second shelf. My father would have liked my son. They could have spent hours building a private air force, discussing the placement of mission decals and the finer points of rudder adjustment. Carl bought a P-51 Mustang for his weekend project. The store is a mess of disorderly shelves stuffed full of models, drawers of glue and paints, racks of Scale Auto magazine and model airplane news, and cases of styrofoam balls and pipe cleaners. On a wire display in the corner are the tiny boxes of plastic soldiers. Each visit, my father would let me buy one box of green Allied Armed Forces and one box of other. The other forces were a mix of tan Japanese, blue Germans, or brown Soviets. Once in a while, I'd beg for a box of gray Confederates, yellow cowboys, or red Indians. When I'd place the boxes of figures on the counter, my father would sigh. We'd spend the rest of the morning together while my mother and sister did whatever it was that mothers and sisters did. My father would open his hobbyist box and set out the proper tools. He'd bring snacks to his little workroom and play his Grand Ole Opry 8-tracks. His hands were massive and thick-fingered, but he had a delicate touch. When he showed me how to accomplish a task at the model table, he'd place his hands over mine, and I'd admire his squared-off fingernails and rough, hairy knuckles. Although I'd stopped coming to the store after my father died, the owner, who'd been in business for nearly 40 years, stared at me as if my model-building ineptitude had haunted him ever since. He rang up our totals and hand-wrote the receipt. His penmanship was small and cramped, his numbers perfectly shaped. He studied Carl through his thick glasses. "The Mustang is a good choice," he said. "It's the best plane from World War II, Carl said. "You learn about planes from your father?" He spoke as if he knew the answer. He watched me when he asked, and I could hear prolonged disappointment floating between the racks of shelves, echoing off the boxes and vials and canisters of spray paint. My son lifted a hand to his face and brushed back his bangs. "My grandfather," he said. The old man squinted at me, as if he was suddenly certain about my identity, and was flummoxed as to how I got into his store. He took my money, unimpressed, as he might be with anyone who couldn't build a model to save his life. The next morning, Carl started building the P-51 before I awoke. When I came into the kitchen, I saw him hunched over the table, hair hanging like dark fangs on the side of his face. I turned on the radio, but kept it low. Mid-morning, the sharp smell of model cement gave me a terrific headache. Carl required nothing of me. I wandered back and forth between the kitchen and the living room. I'd hover and pretend to adjust books and knickknacks on the shelf over the television. Finally, Carl stopped working. He didn't look up or speak. I waited for the horrible sigh to escape his lips. The sigh never came, but the message was loud and clear. I removed myself from the room and paced between the bedroom and the bathroom. "Dad," Carl called, "you're driving me nuts." "Let's just get out of here," I said. I walked down the hall. Carl pushed the plane across the table. "Finally," he said. "What? You didn't want to stay here all day, did you? Why didn't you say you wanted to do something? You were asleep. I started working on the model." "You love models." "Yeah, but I can do those anytime." "Where should we go?" "Anywhere, just let's do something." I thought and then said, "Let's drive to the city." Carl was ready to leave almost before the sentence had left my mouth. He'd been to the city several times for field trips and such, but I'd avoided taking that brief drive for years. I blamed my absence on the crowds, the new underlying current of terrorism, trouble parking, the price of gas. I wasn't even sure I'd remember how to get to the city central, how to find the museums and the mall and the reflecting pool and the memorials. The Washington of my youth was certainly different, an unfamiliar city full of blockaded streets and heightened security. Carl parted his bangs to showcase his long nose and sharp chin, my son's sensitive, honest face. Perhaps the openness there, the penetrating integrity of his young eyes, pushed me the last step. For a second I was again a boy, looking at my father expectantly, hoping that he would see in me something worthy of love, hoping he would reward me with his attention, that time would slow and we would forever remain together. In reality, my father's love was evident. Apart from my inept model building, he routinely told me he was proud of me and that he couldn't have hoped for a nicer son. He'd remove his glasses and place his hands on my shoulder and pull me into a hug. His eyes, without the hard plastic frames, seemed watery and spongy. The immediacy of his face, its glistening pinkness, unnerved me, despite my longing for closeness. At times he verged on tears, and his cheeks quivered, and his lips tried, but failed to form any more words, and he'd hold me tightly for a moment, and then push me back, set his glasses to their rightful position, and all would return to normal. "What'll we do?" Carl said. "Maybe we could go see the monuments? Have you seen them all?" "On a field trip I did, but I don't mind seeing them again," he said, in a rush, afraid I'd make him work more on his model in the dingy apartment. Through the sliding glass doors that led to my slender balcony, I gauged the weather. It was a sunny day, perfect for a trip. My building backs up to a long, snaking alley that runs behind a strip mall on the edge of Route 1. The tar and gravel roof stretches for several acres. Mounds of heating and cooling equipment punctuate the center of each store. Garbage lay strewn around, bottles, 5-gallon buckets, rags, papers. Seagulls gathered on the roof of the supermarket at the end of the strip. Dozens and dozens more came swooping down from the cloudless sky. Driving into Washington sapped any enthusiasm I'd conjured. The highway was wider, and there were numerous new entrance and exit ramps leading to roads and bypasses that confused me. Cars zipped on and off the interstate with little care as to how they merged or passed. The long swoop past the Pentagon was less impressive than in my youth. The building itself had turned ugly and gray. The shoulders were sandy and trash blew up in waves over the guardrails and the median. Crossing from Virginia into the city, once a transition from the green lawns of home to the dusty tunnels of city streets, was now only a fight to stay in the proper lane and to read street signs that came too quickly and were written in lettering too small. By the time we found a parking spot and walked to the mall, I felt irritated and restless and disappointed at my inability to enjoy being with my son. Everywhere we walked, I saw older men who reminded me so distinctly of my father that it hurt both to look at them and to look away. I plastered a smile on my face. As we approached the reflecting pool, Carl grew animated. "Last summer," he said, "Mom and me came out here for the 4th. There were all these older kids around the reflecting pool, jumping in and out of it, throwing frisbees, playing drums. Sounds weird, I said, and a bit dangerous. No, Carl said, sure of himself, as if he'd witnessed real danger on some large scale and was now immune to less potent varieties. Under the honest gaze of Lincoln, amidst the sprawl of people, my son appeared frail, his eyes rimmed with shadow as his fingers unfurled and reached up to touch my arm. Mom says you're sad in ways that she can't understand. How vague of her, I said. She said you used to disappear into the backyard and she couldn't find you. I used to drink in the shed. She brought a flashlight out and shined it in the window. She said the shed was haunted. I saw her looking in the window. But you never answered her? I didn't know what to say. How about, here I am? It never crossed my mind, I said. We walked now down beneath the trees that lined the reflecting pool. The noise of the tourists, a low rumble. Babies crying, families chattering. Some hip-hop kids walked in jackets too heavy for the day. A policeman leaned against a cement post watching women pushing strollers. The shadows of the tree branches stretched like fingertips across the path, nearly touching the water. You're weird, Dad. Yes. Thanks. Part 3, the final part, tomorrow. Thanks for listening.